When does it stop being the case that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are both the president-elect, according to a great many people in the country, both of these probabilities existing at once? When does it collapse into who will be the president? Well, if you ask President Trump, I guess it would be December 14th, except he was just asked by a reporter, if the electors vote for Joe Biden on December 14th, will you concede? His answer, a little ambiguous.
It's going to be a very hard thing to concede because we know there was massive fraud. So as to whether or not I can get this apparatus moving this quickly, because time isn't on our side, everything else is on our side, facts are on our side. This was a massive fraud. This should never take place in this country. We're like a third world country. We have machines that nobody knows what the hell they're looking at. I mean, you take a look at all the mistakes they made. Look at even Georgia. Look at all the mistakes they made. And all that was is a simple, you press a button. Look at Georgia, all the votes they found just by going. And I said they shouldn't even do it because it doesn't mean anything. They're doing a recount right now in Georgia that is meaningless. The only recount that matters in Georgia is to look at the signatures on the envelope, and you will find that those signatures do not match the people that were many of them, hundreds of thousands of them, hundreds of thousands, and I only lost by 12,000 votes. I didn't lose. I didn't even like to say I lose.
Okay, so you see the point here. President Trump saying, I don't know, it's a hard thing to concede. Now, I don't think that President Trump is going to declare a military dictatorship, and martial law if the electors vote for Biden on December 14th. But he's not conceding yet, nor should he. According to the media, it's clear Donald Trump lost. He lost by a lot. Oh, there's not too much evidence of fraud. Oh, forget about Georgia. Forget about Pennsylvania. That's all bunk. There is a lot of evidence of what we call irregularities. And maybe we should use a harsher term even than irregularities. There was no reason. If everything was above board, there was no reason to stop the vote counting at 10:30 at night on election night in certain highly democratically controlled precincts. Okay, there was no reason to do that. There was especially no reason, as we saw in Georgia, to then surreptitiously restart the counting at 1 in the morning when there were no poll watchers around whatsoever. There was no reason for the Democratic-run machine cities to prevent Republican poll watchers from watching the count. There was especially no reason for those same democratically run cities to ignore a court order demanding that Republican poll watchers watch the count. There was no reason to do any of that if everything was above board. But maybe everything was not above board. We're being told by the media there's no evidence that there was any fraud in this election. Obviously, we've gone through quite a bit of that evidence on this show. But we saw some more evidence of that last week. Last week during a Pennsylvania hearing on some of the irregularities here, you had a data specialist come out, Colonel Phil Waldron, make even more explosive claims than any of the evidence we've been discussing on this show. Phil Waldron claimed that the election software that was used all around this country, in a great many places, was built to be hacked.
The voting systems in the U.S. And in Pennsylvania were built to be manipulated. They've been used in elections around the world and stolen elections around the world in Venezuela, Italy, Argentina, Singapore, Bolivia as close as 2 weeks ago. The Philadelphia uses ES&S, Pittsburgh uses Dominion, other counties in Pennsylvania use Dominion and other systems. So what's the real deal? So all of these election systems have a common DNA. SGO Smartmatic sold Sequoia voting systems to Dominion in 2010. And then the Diebold company spun off Premier Election Systems to Dominion as a result of an antitrust suit. I know there have been statements to the contrary, but I personally debriefed the son of a Cuban intelligence officer who had firsthand knowledge of Hugo Chavez's family members who told him not to worry about the populist threat against Maduro's election in Venezuela. Quote unquote, that it was guaranteed. Their father invested the money to build the SGO voting machine system. So I had no reason to doubt this gentleman. He's sworn an affidavit to this effect.
These are pretty explosive claims. And before the media write this guy off as some total kook who heard this from a guy, and he's the dry cleaner of the cousin of, this is a serious person this Colonel Phil Waldron, talking about serious people, Cuban intelligence officers. We know there's a very tight relationship between Cuban intelligence and Venezuela, particularly under Hugo Chavez. These claims are that through various companies, various sales of companies, there has been some association between the different election software companies here, notably Dominion, and that it was possible for the election to have been hacked. That in a certain sense, these machines were built such that the election could have been hacked. Dominion, of course, denies all of this. I think it's pretty clear that this guy's showing vulnerabilities. He actually flat out states that the devices are connected to the internet, so they have at least the logical possibility of being hacked. The problem here, though, with running out of time, as President Trump pointed out, is the Trump team needs to provide proof not merely that this could happen, but that it did happen. And I know it's very, very difficult to provide that proof. Even if it did happen around the country, even if millions of votes were shifted, it would be very difficult to find the proof of that. But the Trump team needs to provide the proof of that, or, and this is just a purely descriptive matter, the courts are not going to overthrow the election. And frankly, even the state legislatures are not going to flip the certification or refuse to certify in the places that they haven't. It just won't happen. They need to provide the proof that it did happen. Now, look, there is evidence. We're being told there's no evidence of anything. And even let's forget about the poll watchers for a second. There's no evidence that there were any irregularities because of the voting machines or batches of votes coming in. BS. There's a ton of evidence of that. In fact, Colonel Waldron points out that there was a massive vote dump. Well, there have been massive vote dumps in a number of places with statistical anomalies, one of which showed that more than 99% of the ballots in one dump went to Joe Biden.
Normally, you would expect to see a smooth curve going up, not any big spikes. That's kind of what Greg was talking about, the anomalies of loading and uploading those votes. So that big spike that occurs there is a prime indicator of fraudulent voting.
And that's 604,000 votes in 90 minutes, is that right?
Correct. This is 337 votes, 337,000 votes in that
period of time.
Yes.
And when you look at this entire curve with all these spikes, can you calculate how much of a vote that accounted for Biden and how much for Trump?
Close to 600,000. I think our figures were about 570 some odd thousand that all those spikes represent over time.
For Biden?
Correct.
And how much for Trump?
I think it was a little over 3,200.
570,000 for Biden, 3,000 for Trump, which means that in that batch that came in, Joe Biden received 99.4% of the vote. We got to congratulate Joe Biden. Joe Biden managed to outperform Saddam Hussein at the height of his power in Iraq in certain voting batch dumps in certain counties in America. Wow, good job, Joe. Here I thought that there was very little enthusiasm for Joe Biden's candidacy. Turns out he does better numbers than a Middle Eastern dictator. Does he? Or maybe not. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe that's statistically impossible. Now, we have so much of this evidence. And yet, if you can't prove that it was done, not merely that it could be done, not merely that the statistics point to that it was done, if you can't prove that it was done, then all of this evidence and $1.50 is going to get us a buck, or rather, it's going to get us a cup of coffee. Now, there is some hope out of the courts. I think, again, it's probably unlikely that the courts are going to grow enough of a spine to decertify election results, to halt the end of this election. However, there is some good news. In Georgia, there was an emergency order just sent in by Judge Timothy Batten Sr., which will prevent election officials from wiping or resetting any voting machines in the state of Georgia until further order of the court. This is very important because if there were anomalies on these voting machines, you want to at least preserve the computers so that you might have some evidence. Maybe you don't even have evidence after that. But at the very least, this judge thinks that there is enough evidence that there was tampering in the voting machines in Georgia that we need to stop those voting machines from being wiped or reset. Again, is that going to be enough? I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical that that will be enough. Unless you can provide hard proof, I think that these judges are going to not want to be seen as interfering in the political process, throwing an election, and